What happens when the very person who signs the paychecks is treated as invisible? Dominic Walsh sat silently in the silver-grey rented sedan, his hands still gripping the steering wheel, even though the car had been parked in front of Aurora Haven Center number 4 for nearly 10 minutes. The Santa Rosa sun was pale, but his chest felt heavy. Through the windshield was the building he had once been proud to help build, part of a chain of 9 wellness centers that had grown at lightning speed over the past 6 years. Revenue was stable, the brand was on the rise. But lately, what troubled him weren't the numbers, but the whispers. Cold, uncaring, indifferent, scattered complaint emails, sporadic negative reviews, arrived on time and was still made to wait. The receptionist looked at me like a beggar. I left without anyone bothering to say a word. Dominic didn't like polished reports. He used to believe in the numbers, believe in his middle management. But now, that trust was fracturing. He needed to see for himself, not through the PR department, not through KPI reports, but through his own eyes. That morning, Dominic shaved off his familiar beard, dyed his hair a salt and pepper color, put on a pair of thick-rimmed glasses, and threw on a faded polo shirt and a pair of wrinkled khakis. In his hand was an old canvas bag. He looked no different from a middle-aged man who had just lost his job, trying to find affordable health care. He chose the name Doug West, a forgettable name. Stepping through the automatic glass doors, the first thing Dominic felt wasn't the air conditioning, but indifference. No one looked up. The waiting room was quiet, with only the sound of lo-fi background music and the faint white light. 3 clients sat scattered about, each glued to their phone. Behind the counter was a young woman with thick eyelashes, her eyes never leaving her screen. A small nameplate read Cara. Dominic walked over and said softly, "Hi, I have a consultation scheduled for 10 o'clock. Name." Cara didn't look up, still chewing gum. Doug West." She typed a few keys, then said, "Have a seat. Someone will come get you." He nodded, silently taking a seat by the window. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then 40. No one was called. No one came in or out. Cara just stared at her phone, occasionally snickering at some video. A man sitting next to him whispered, "I've been here since 9:40. I think she's forgotten about us." Dominic stood up and walked back to the counter. "Excuse me, I just wanted to check again. I already told you someone will come get you." "Stop asking," Cara snapped, not even bothering to glance at him. Every minute stretched on like a silent humiliation. By 12:15, he had been sitting there for over 2.5 hours. 2 clients had left. Cara was still, scrolling through her phone, when a tall employee came out and asked, "Who's next?" Cara pointed vaguely, "I don't know. There's some guy who's been nagging all morning." That was the moment Dominic froze, not out of anger, but out of disbelief. He left, but he didn't leave the fight, because the worst thing wasn't being disrespected. It was that a place once named for healing made people feel invisible. Dominic returned to his hotel that night and made a decision tomorrow morning. He would go back. Not as a client, but as a trainee named Derek Mason. The next morning, the silver sedan was parked in the same spot. But this time, Dominic wasn't staring at the steering wheel. He stepped out with a straighter, neater posture than the day before, but still perfectly maintained the unemployed middle-aged man look. A fresh buzz cut, his glasses swapped for thick black frames, and a fake compass tattoo in temporary ink on his wrist. In his hand was a job application packet with a faded print, not the high-quality paper from the corporate office, but the kind you buy at a backstreet stationery store. The name on it, Derek Mason. Position, front desk trainee. Objective, to serve customers better. He pushed open the door to the center, and no one recognized the client Doug from yesterday. Tracy Calloway, the branch manager, looked up for exactly 3 seconds when she took the application, then nodded. "We're severely short-staffed. You can start today, Derek. No interview, no background check." And no one asked why a 47-year-old man wanted a low-wage job as a front desk trainee. They needed bodies, but they didn't need to care. The morning shift began. For the first time, Dominic stepped backstage at the place he owned. There, Cara was still the star of sloppiness. 9:12 a.m. She walked in with an iced coffee cup nearly the size of a water bottle, wearing sunglasses and giggling on the phone with someone. Oh my God. Yesterday, some old guy waited for 2 hours and still wanted to see the doctor. I was like, "This isn't a hospital," and told him to beat it. Dominic was organizing a file cabinet, freezing as he heard every word. Cara didn't recognize him, nor did she remember the name Doug West. To her, people like him were nothing worth remembering. At the reception desk, he was assigned to the same shift as Cara, but in reality, he was the only one working. Cara disappeared for about 30 minutes without telling anyone. An elderly female client came in, wanting to ask about her test results. Standing awkwardly in front of the counter, Dominic wanted to help, but he wasn't given an account to access the system. Every time he typed something, the screen showed "Access denied." When Cara returned, a strong scent of perfume wafted from her. She glanced at Dominic. "What are you doing? You don't need to log in. Just sit there. If a client asks, tell them to wait." He didn't reply. He just observed and remembered. That afternoon, Dominic happened to meet someone else, the only person in the entire center who made the atmosphere less suffocating. Elise Monroe, about 30-something, with a small frame, her hair tied in a high ponytail, bright eyes, and hands that were always busy. She was pushing a cart of clean towels and stopped to look at Dominic. "You're new. I'm Elise. You'd better get a drink before Cara dehydrates you with her attitude." Dominic smiled faintly. "Derek, first day. Good luck. This place isn't easy." Elise moved on, her hands nimbly arranging bottles of sanitizer and clean towels, not complaining, not stopping. But Dominic noticed something. Every gap left by Cara or Tracy Elise was silently patching it up. When a client arrived and no one was at the desk, Elise temporarily left the sanitation room to give directions. When a bill was printed incorrectly, she found a way to handle it. When a client was confused, she was the one who smiled, placed a hand on their shoulder, and said, "It's okay. I'm here to help." Late in the afternoon, Dominic sat in the break room, opening the lunchbox he'd brought from the hotel. He heard Kara's voice from the hallway. "That new trainee is slow as an old man. I have no idea who hired him." Dominic clenched his hand slightly, not because he was insulted, but because he knew if this was how they talked about a new person, a client, an anonymous old man, then how many people had silently left and never come back, and how many Elises were single-handedly keeping the whole system from collapsing. The first day wasn't over, but Dominic was beginning to understand the coldness here. Wasn't a system error. It was the result of people who had been forgiven for too long. As the clock struck 3 p.m., Aurora Haven Center number 4 entered a period of dead silence, the silence of a system operating out of sync. Kara had disappeared again. No one knew where she went. Tracy was still busy in a meeting in her office with the door locked, and had been since before noon. Dominic sat behind the reception desk, holding a pen with no ink, pretending to take notes so he wouldn't draw attention. But he was actually watching Elise, the woman who, that morning, had appeared only briefly like a ray of sunshine in a gloomy place. And then he realized she didn't need a spotlight, because she was the one silently keeping everything from falling apart. Elise pushed her cart through the hallways, stopping in each room to restock clean towels, check the level of hand sanitizer, and wipe down a massage table a client had just left, all in silence. Not rushed, but not a second of laziness either. An elderly couple walked in, looking lost because Kara wasn't at the desk. Dominic was about to step out and help, but Elise appeared behind him, still holding a box of supplies. "Hello, are you here to see Dr. Omar?" Yes, but we don't know where to go." "It's okay. I'll show you the way. No snapping, no rushing, no annoyance." Afterward, when she returned to the reception area, Elise spoke softly to Dominic. "If Kara is still gone, remember to check the 3 o'clock list. There's a young woman named Mia coming for a facial. She gets anxious easily and has trouble breathing. If she waits too long, she might leave." Dominic nodded. "You remember every client?" Elise just smiled. "I don't remember all of them, but I remember the ones who need to be remembered." That sentence lingered in Dominic's mind like a tiny needle touching the softest part of his soul. Kara glided back in as if nothing had happened. The moment she sat down, she opened TikTok. Dominic heard her mutter, "God, who has the time to walk around cleaning floors like a housewife?" Elise was still working at the end of the hall. She didn't hear, or chose not to. But Dominic heard it clearly, and he saw the invisibility that kind people always had to endure. The shift was nearing its end. Dominic quietly wiped the counter, then pretended to ask Elise, "Does Tracy ever come down?" Elise didn't answer right away. She arranged a bottle of hand sanitizer and then said quietly, "If it's not about this month's quota, she doesn't come down." Dominic let out a slow breath, not out of surprise, but out of confirmation. Tracy didn't manage. She just tallied numbers before leaving. Dominic went to the break room, intending to check his phone for messages. But then he heard Kara's voice from the hallway, louder this time. On the phone. "Yeah, I don't care either. Yesterday some old guy waited forever and acted like I owed him money. Excuse me, this is a wellness center, not a charity home." A pause, then a loud laugh. Dominic froze. He looked at his phone screen, reflecting the dim light. The old guy from yesterday was him. He gripped his phone, trying to stay calm. This was no longer laziness. This was contempt. That evening, when Dominic returned to his hotel, he didn't turn on the TV. He didn't eat dinner. He just sat in a chair, his head in his hands. He once thought he was here to check on the system, but now he understood clearly the problem was the people, and only people like Elise could save this place. Tomorrow, he wouldn't just observe anymore. He would start to intervene in a way no one would see coming. The next morning, Dominic arrived earlier than usual. He wore the old polo shirt, worn-out sneakers, and entered through the side door just like any other support staff member. The reception area lights were off. The waiting room was still. Kara, nowhere in sight. Only Elise, who had been there for who knows how long, was pulling a cart of clean towels, her hair tied neatly, her uniform crisp, her eyes still holding that familiar calm glint. "You're early," she said softly as she passed, not breaking her stride, trying to make a good impression. Dominic replied, half joking, half serious. Elise gave a slight nod and disappeared down the hallway, leaving behind a silence that felt like a warning before a storm. Kara walked in, baggy hoodie, eyes still glued to her phone, hair uncombed. A massive coffee cup swung in her hand. Her ear was pressed to her phone. "I told you. If that old guy is still mad about the other day, let him be. It's his own fault for coming early. So annoying." She tossed her bag onto the counter and plopped into the chair as if the reception desk were her living room sofa. Dominic looked up, not angry, not sad. Only one thing was rising within him, a disappointment so profound it needed no words. A woman in her 60s, her greying hair tied back neatly, entered with a light but slightly limping gait. In her hand, she held a confirmation printed from an email, trembling. "I have an appointment with Dr. Patel at 8:30, she said, her eyes full of hope, as if she were about to be healed of something. Kara glanced at the clock and then went back to her phone. "The doctor isn't out yet. Have a seat." Just that. No smile, no eye contact, no guidance. The woman hesitated for a few seconds. "I had to take the whole morning off work to come here. I already told you. Have a seat." Kara replied, her eyes not leaving Instagram. Dominic was about to intervene, but he stopped himself to observe more. He needed evidence. He needed every detail so that later no one could deny it. "Ma'am, let me check the schedule for you," Dominic said, stepping toward the computer, his hands hovering over the keyboard, but the screen was still locked. "What are you doing?" Kara glanced over. "You're just a trainee. Don't mess things up." The woman sat down, clutching her purse, her gaze lowered. Dr. Patel, a thin man with glasses, emerged from a meeting room, looking slightly flustered. "Has the patient named Hill arrived yet?" Kara didn't look up. "Yeah, but you weren't at the desk. I've been in my office since 8:10. Well, you didn't say anything." Dr. Patel tilted his head. "Why didn't you call me when you saw her arrive? It's not my job to keep track of the doctor's schedules." Dominic turned to Kara and said softly, "You knew she had been here since 8:30, so everyone should know their own schedule. I'm not a babysitter." As Mrs. Hill stood up to follow Dr. Patel, Dominic watched them go. Her eyes weren't angry, not resentful, just sad. Sad, as if a piece of her faith in kindness had just crumbled. When they disappeared down the hall, Dominic turned to Kara. "Do you usually let clients wait without telling anyone? People need to know their own appointments. Don't act like you know what you're doing when you don't even know how to turn on the printer." Just then, Elise returned from the sanitation room. She only glanced over, saying nothing, but Dominic saw it clearly. For the first time, Elise's gaze was no longer gentle. It was a look of unforgiveness. Immediately after, Dominic opened his phone and went to his notes app. He wrote 8:05. Kara absent. No reason. 8:22. Arrived late. Indifferent attitude. 8:30. Disrespectful to elderly client. 8:45. Ignored doctor's presence. Client interaction curt, sarcastic, internal communication divisive, irresponsible. At this point, Dominic was no longer asking himself, "Is there a problem?" but rather, "How will I handle this without hurting the good people?" Because if Elise was the reason people like Mrs. Hill still came back, then Kara was the reason the vulnerable lost faith in what was called health care. The morning passed heavily, not because the work was overwhelming, but because of the weary atmosphere that crept through the halls of Aurora Haven. Tracy suddenly appeared for the first time that day, clutching a tablet, her eyes fixed on no one. Her steps were decisive but hurried, as if she herself didn't want to stay long in the place she managed. "Derek," Tracy said, her eyes still on the screen. "You switch to handling towels and wiping down equipment. Elise, you take over the reception desk." Dominic froze. He glanced at Kara, who was still swiping endlessly on her phone. Wait, why Elise Kara is still sitting right there? Kara looked up, scowling. "What, haven't I been on duty long enough?" Tracy didn't answer, just swept past like a cold breeze, leaving a silent confusion in her wake. Elise emerged from the sanitation room, her hands still damp, startled to hear her name called without anyone having asked her. "Me, at the desk." "Yeah," Kara said with a resentful tone. "Tracy's orders. I'm free now." Elise hesitated for a moment. Dominic saw her hand clench slightly, but only for a second. Then she walked over and sat in the chair Kara had just vacated, as if not taking someone's old spot, but stepping into a silent battle. And then the entire atmosphere changed. No more the clattering of a coffee cup, No more TikTok playing from a phone. No more the soulless. Have a seat. Instead, there was presence, care, and understanding. A female client arrived, asking about a scheduled skin checkup. Elise greeted her by name, smiled, and offered her a glass of water. The phone rang. A bill had been printed incorrectly. Elise said softly, "I'll take care of that for you right away. I just need the client ID." A man was struggling with a lost insurance bill. Elise asked detailed questions, printed a new copy, folded it neatly into a plastic sleeve, and handed it to him. Dominic stood behind the auxiliary counter, observing it all. He didn't intervene, didn't step forward, just watched Elise do the very things Kara had considered a nuisance. She didn't need to be loud, didn't need to feign enthusiasm. She just needed to be there, with a calmness that made others feel respected, even if they were just there for a small treatment package. And in that quietness, Dominic felt something he had forgotten while managing from a distance. Care doesn't come from a process. It comes from people. Dominic took a stack of clean towels to the steam room. On the way, he overheard a young client say to her friend, "Did they change the person at the front desk today? She's so gentle." "Yeah, probably a new employee. I wish she was always on duty." When he returned, Elise was still handling two clients at once, one asking about an appointment, the other waiting for a bill. Her hands never stopped moving, but her voice remained soft, her gaze unhurried. Dominic stepped closer and said quietly, "Need any help?" Elise smiled. "You can help me by not letting anyone cut in line." "Easy enough. That would be great." When Kara returned to the desk and saw Elise still in the chair, she scowled. "I thought I was supposed to get an hour break." Elise didn't reply. She was folding an insurance bill, attaching an appointment reminder, and placing it neatly in an envelope. Kara looked, then walked away. Dominic, however, looked and stayed, because he understood kind people often don't say much. But they are the reason clients return, not for the service, but for the feeling of being treated like a human being. The internal speaker suddenly crackled to life. Tracy's voice echoed curtly from the manager's office. "All staff currently in the center. Gather in the break room. Urgent meeting." Dominic glanced at the clock, then at Elise. She had just escorted an elderly client to the door, offering a tired but genuine smile. She had heard it too. Elise sighed, set the receipt printer to stand by, and walked with Dominic into the break room, a small room with frosted glass walls, a rattling air conditioner, and an old, long-neglected whiteboard on the wall. The room was so cramped that the last person to arrive had to stand. Elise chose a spot near the water cooler. Dominic stood back near the door, observing as always, this time with a small notebook hidden in his shirt pocket. Tracy strode in with the tablet clutched in her hand, her high heels striking the floor with each step. She stood in the middle of the room, not looking at anyone. "Listen up. Corporate is starting a system-wide review. We are failing badly on 3 metrics: upselling services, client retention rates, and online reviews. A pause. Therefore, starting this week, when a client comes in for a basic treatment, you must propose an add-on service. A massage, suggest a combo. A skin treatment, suggest a serum. Don't let anyone walk out without being closed on something. Is that clear? No one answered. Tracy looked around, her gaze a command. I don't need feedback. I need results. Dominic wrote in his notebook, Tracy, pushing sales, no mention of quality or client feedback. Suddenly, Elise raised her hand. Excuse me, but lately, many clients have complained about waiting too long. I think, if we had one more person to help at the desk. Tracy cut her off. There's no budget. Everyone just has to do more. The issue is efficiency, not headcount. Elise fell silent. No protest. But Dominic saw it clearly. Her hands were gently clenching the hem of her shirt. Cara was sitting at the end of the table, her phone under the desk, her thumb swiping lightly. Dominic saw it, but no one said a word. Tracy continued. One more thing. I've noticed someone is overly focused on cleaning. It's a waste of supplies. Unnecessary. Focus on the clients. Don't waste time wiping what's already clean. Elise lowered her head. No name was mentioned, but everyone knew who that person was. The meeting ended without a Q&A session. Tracy swept out of the room like a cold wind. Cara giggled, stretched, and muttered, There's always someone who likes to act all clean. Dominic walked over to Elise, but she had already headed toward the time clock, without looking back. For the first time, he saw Elise without a smile. In that moment, Dominic realized people like Elise, they aren't afraid of more work or of being forgotten, but what they fear most is being treated like a nuisance for speaking up for what's right. That afternoon, Dominic didn't eat. He sat in the break room, opened his small notebook, and wrote the first line in red ink, I came here to observe. But now, I must act. Dominic was stacking towels in a back storage area when he heard the sound of an argument echoing from the reception desk. A woman's voice, upset, unsteady with anger. I was charged twice for the same treatment session. I only came once. On Tuesday. A moment of silence. Then Cara's voice. Slow. Arrogant. I can't handle that. I just work the desk. I can't interfere with billing. Dominic froze. He put the stack of towels down on a shelf, walked into the hallway, and stood hidden behind a partition, observing. The woman, in her 40s, well-dressed, held the bill, which trembled with her anger. You work at the reception desk and you don't know anything about payments. Then who am I supposed to talk to? Cara leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. Like I said, not me. Maybe you forgot you came in twice. That sentence was like an invisible knife stabbing straight into the woman's self-respect. And then Elise appeared. She walked out of the sanitation room, a paper towel still in her hand, having heard the last sentence, and immediately interjected, Hi, I'm Elise. I can check the transaction history for you. Cara glared. No need to overdo it. She probably did forget. The woman's face flushed. Are you calling me a liar? Elise stepped forward, positioning herself between the two, her voice calm but firm. Please have a seat for just a minute. I'll print out your visit history. If it's a system error, we will take care of it immediately. The woman nodded, her eyes still glistening with angry tears. Kara stood up huffily, muttering, "Someone just loves to act like she's so capable." Dominic clenched his fists behind the partition. 2 minutes later, Elise returned with a printout, her voice gentle. "You came in exactly once. The error occurred because the system mistakenly saved an automatic appointment. I will report this and process a refund today." The woman sighed in relief, not just because she had an explanation, but because someone had been willing to listen. "Thank you. That's all I needed." She left, her steps light, the tension gone from her posture. Elise watched her go, then returned to the desk, continuing her work without needing anyone's thanks. Dominic stepped out from behind the wall, walked straight to the vending machine, and pressed the button for a can of ginger tea. His hand trembled slightly, not from anger, but from enlightenment. He had seen enough to understand that Kara wasn't just bad. She was a risk to the brand, to the clients, and to the morale of people like Elise. He pulled out his phone, found the number for regional HR, and called directly. "This is Dominic Walsh. Yes, I'm at the Santa Rosa Center. I need Kara terminated, effective today. I'm not waiting until Monday. I'm not waiting for a report. I have proof, and I have someone good enough to save this place." A representative from regional HR appeared, carrying a briefcase and a folder. She walked over to Kara, who was leaning back in her chair, playing on her phone as if nothing had happened, and said softly, "Hi. I need you to come with me to the back room for a moment. Just a quick HR check-in." Kara stood up, shrugging. "Ugh, another one of those stupid surveys." The door opened. Kara walked out, clutching her bag, her face pale, without saying a word. She left Aurora Haven, without an argument, without tears, without remorse. Only the cold void she left behind. Elise looked up from the printer, watching Dominic. What was that? Why did she? Dominic didn't speak. He picked up a broom, walked out to the reception area, and began sweeping the floor, like a janitor at the end of his shift. He didn't need to speak. His actions had already answered. This place no longer had room for those who disrespected others, whether they were clients or colleagues. The Santa Rosa sky turned purple, the last rays of sun stretching long across the tiled floor of Aurora Haven Center, number 4. The official shift had ended over half an hour ago, but in the quiet building, 2 people still lingered, silently, without being told. Elise was taking inventory of clean towels in a supply closet. Dominic, still in his Derek Mason persona, was wiping down the hallway handrails. Neither of them spoke, but the silence was no longer as heavy as before. It was peaceful, like a silent acknowledgement between 2 people who had once stood at opposite ends of invisibility. Elise was the first to speak. "You haven't left yet. Most new people disappear after the second day." Dominic smiled, placing the mop in a corner. "I'm still trying to understand how this place works. Honestly. Elise leaned lightly against the wall near the towel cabinet. It doesn't work. We just survive, day by day. He nodded. I've seen that. Elise hesitated for a moment, then turned to him. But I've never seen anyone like you, listening, observing, but not interfering, not assuming, just being present. Dominic let out a soft laugh. You make me sound like a wooden statue. No, she shook her head. More like someone who's seen a worse place and is waiting to see if this one is worth saving. The words made Dominic pause for a second. Another silence. Then Elise changed the subject, gently, but sharp as a knife. What did you do before this? Dominic didn't answer right away. The simple question was the hardest one he'd had to face all week. Finally, he replied, office manager. Let's call it that. Elise nodded. I used to call it that about my old boss too, until I found out he ran the whole healthcare network. A faint smile crossed her lips, not mocking, but like an open-ended question. Dominic turned, his eyes meeting hers, deep, direct, but not forceful. And in that moment, they both understood a piece of the truth had been shared, even without being spoken. Elise went back to her work, but her voice was lower. I've been here for 2 years, part-time, but I work full-time hours. No complaints, no whining. But sometimes, I wonder, does anyone see Dominic gently tightened his grip on the mop handle? Someone does. Elise turned back. You, yes. Dominic nodded. And not just sees, but remembers. They closed up the center together. Dominic held the door. Elise turned off the lights. As they walked out to the parking lot, the pale yellow street lights cast their shadows side by side. Elise. Dominic said, yeah, thank you. For not leaving like so many others. She smiled. Thank you. For not looking at me like I was just the front desk staff. They stood there for a moment, not as an employee and a trainee, but as two adults who had just emerged from a silent battle in which they were both wounded. As Elise turned to leave, Dominic stayed for a moment longer, pulling the notebook from his pocket. He wrote a single line, tomorrow. It's time to start telling the truth. The break room was packed once again. Tension filled the space, the air thick as if before a rainstorm. Tracy Calloway stood in the middle of the room with her familiar air of authority, the tablet like a shield she always used to deflect any criticism. Kara had been gone since yesterday, and this time no one dared to ask. Elise. Tracy glanced quickly. Starting tomorrow, you're back to being a floater. We'll have new staff from corporate handling the desk. Elise said nothing. She just stared at the floor. But Dominic saw her hand tremble slightly. Tracy continued. I'll also be changing the desk rotation. Lately, some people have been working more than necessary. I'll remind you again, this is a job, not a place to prove yourself. Dominic sighed, not out of surprise, but because the arrogance had become so ingrained that right and wrong were no longer visible. And in that very moment, He took a step forward. "May I have a minute?" Dominic said, his voice quiet but clear in the silent room. Tracy blinked. "Excuse me. This is an announcement, not a feedback session." Dominic didn't back down. "Then this isn't feedback. This is a decision." He pulled a small envelope from his pocket, walked to the center of the room, and handed it directly to Tracy. Tracy took it, a flash of confusion in her eyes. She opened the envelope. Inside was a letter printed on letterhead no one at this branch had ever seen before. Logo Aurora Haven Wellness, Executive Board. After scanning just a few lines, Tracy's eyes froze. Then her face went pale. Dominic took off his glasses and dropped the neutral tone he had used for days. "My name is Dominic Walsh. I am the founder and owner of the Aurora Haven chain. I have sat in this reception room. I have been ignored. I have been disrespected. I have witnessed clients being blamed, employees being stifled, and kindness being treated as weakness." The room was so silent it felt as if the air had been sucked out. Tracy stammered, You're... Dominic held up a hand to stop her. "Don't say anything. Today. You don't need to explain. You need to leave." He turned to Elise. "Elise Monroe, as of this moment, you are the assistant manager of the Aurora Haven Santa Rosa Center." Elise's eyes widened. Her hand flew to her mouth, unable to stop a tear that was about to fall. "You held this place together when everyone else chose to turn their backs. Now, you will help me rebuild it, from the inside out." Dominic turned to the entire staff. "I want a list of everyone who was overlooked, who was treated unfairly. I want to know who is really doing the work. And I want to end the culture of disrespect that we have unintentionally fostered." Tracy tried to regain her composure. "I have dedicated years to this chain." Dominic looked straight at her. "And in those years, you made others believe that coldness was professionalism. You made kind people feel like they were doing something wrong." He nodded to the HR representative who had been standing quietly in the corner from the beginning. "Ms. Calloway, please collect your things." No one clapped. No one said anything. But in Elise's eyes, in the undisguised emotion welling up, Dominic knew. He hadn't gone too far. He had gone just deep enough to reach the faith of someone who had been on the verge of giving up. A day after Tracy left, the Aurora Haven Santa Rosa Center was no longer a place where people came and went in silence, as if everyone was just a name on an appointment slip. Now, it was a place where clients were called by name, greeted with eye contact, and asked how they were not out of procedure, but out of sincerity. Elise Monroe, now the one who scheduled, trained, listened, and protected, didn't use her title to give orders. She still came in before her shift, still helped fold towels, still helped her colleagues learn the new system. And most importantly, she became the first image clients saw, and the reason they wanted to come back. One afternoon, Dominic sat at a small table by the window, looking at the new weekly work schedule Elise had just printed. Every shift had a name. No one was left out. No one was stuck with bad shifts 3 days in a row. He turned to Elise and said quietly, "Do you know what management is? Knowing when you're wrong and not hiding it." She asked back. He smiled. "It's knowing who is silently holding the whole system together and giving them the voice they deserve." That afternoon, Dominic organized a simple meal in the break room. Nothing fancy, no banners, just chicken curry from the small shop on the corner, the corn cakes Elise liked, and the ginger tea Mr. Alvarez had once praised. He stood up, raising his cup of tea. "Last week, I came here as an invisible man. I was ignored. I was disrespected. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it made me see what the reports would never write, that a center isn't built with bricks, but by the people who quietly do the right thing, even when no one is clapping." He turned to Elise. "Thank you for not staying silent." She smiled. "Thank you for listening when everyone else ignored it." After the meal, Dominic put up a new notice in the lobby. "Starting next quarter, Aurora Haven will implement a system for employees to review leadership, including the highest levels." A young employee raised his hand. "Does that include you?" "Boss." Dominic nodded. "If I ever forget to listen again, remind me, and if you have to, write it down." That evening, as Dominic and Elise were turning off the lights at the center, he paused at the door. "You know what? What this center isn't perfect yet, but it's alive again." Elise didn't say anything. She just placed her hand on the door switch, then whispered, "Because this time, it's being rebuilt by people who know what it's like to be hurt and chose not to turn away. Sometimes, to change an entire system, you don't need to be the CEO. You just need to be the kind person who doesn't leave. And when the one at the top is brave enough to bow down, the one who silently held it all together is finally handed the key." The text appeared on screen. "A healing center begins by acknowledging the harm it once caused. Some things can't be fixed by policy, only healed by people. Some silences don't need words, just a kind look. And some systems don't collapse for lack of funds, but because for too long no one had the courage to care anymore." If you are in a place where it feels like no one sees you, remember there are still those who are quietly watching, and one day they will stand up for you.